What if I told you about the strongest army that never actually existed? This is the story of Operation Bodyguard, which was a critical part and the greatest deception military campaign ever pulled in history, before or since. Operation Bodyguard was done in conjunction to mask the true intentions of Operation Overlord, which was the Normandy landings on June 6th of 1944. Now, the reason why this operation and landing was so successful, I mean, if it wasn't for this operation and deception tactic, the Normandy landings would not have gone as they have. Now, granted, it was a bloody and very costly affair, but the setup of the Normandy landings completely caught Hitler and everybody else in the Nazis by surprise. Here's how this thing worked. First things first, the Allies posed like they were going to potentially land in Norway. But this was a minor portion. This was basically Operation Bodyguard North. Operation Bodyguard South is the one that really, really mattered. And this is the one where the totally made-up and fictional 1st Army Group of the United States Army, under the command of General George S Patton, was supposedly stationed near modern-day Folkestone, England, and was set up complete with inflatable tanks and everything else, amphibious vehicles, and fake ships in the port near Folkestone and Dover, England, which were then stationed so that the Nazis would be able to detect these fictional amphibious craft and tanks. And again, supposedly under the command of George S Patton, the 1st Army Group would be using Folkestone to take off from to make a landing at Pas-de-Calais or Calais on the northern coast of France. This, of course, geographically makes the most sense because that is the shortest distance across the English Channel. For proof of this, all you need to do is look up the Channel Tunnel. This is the path that takes because it is the shortest distance between the British coast and the French coast across the British Channel, about 20 miles. And that is the modern-day path of the Channel Tunnel, which carries train traffic between England and France. A channel that was completed, I believe, in 1996. But going back to 1944, this fictional army was set up so good, and it was made to look like it was going to make the landing at Calais. Of course, instead, as everybody now knows, the real landing happened in Normandy, which is about 50 miles west, which is a longer trip across the channel, and it caught everybody by surprise, including the general in charge of the defense of the Western Wall, as they called it, General Erwin Rommel, the most decorated and celebrated general in the Wehrmacht, or the German army. Became famous for his exploits in North Africa earlier. But of course, after he got pulled from Northern Africa, he was put in charge of this Western Wall defense, complete with bunkers and panzer tanks and everything that they could throw at them. But this deception was so good that the majority of these defenses were placed at Calais. The reports then started coming in on June 6th of 1944 of the landings at Normandy. This got Hitler so good that he woke up from that report and assumed that was a false landing, and he was like, when are we going to have the real invasion? Well, obviously he was wrong. But how are they tricked so good by this false army? Well, it's a series of double agents that were used by the British that really clinched the deal. A couple Spanish double agents in particular. What a double agent was in this case was they were on the German payroll to work for Nazi Germany, but they were stationed in London, and they were also paid by the British to provide false information back to Hitler. Hence the double agent plan. This is the first time in world history that this spy tactic has ever been effectively used, a tactic that is still used heavily today. So, a couple of Spanish double agents worked very well in this regard, were very trusted by Hitler and by the Nazi Party, and the British fed him this information about this fictional First Army group of under George Patton, will be making their invasion at Calais. As I said before, when the real invasion happened on June 6th, Hitler was woken up from his slumber, which I pray for the general. I would be praying for the general who actually did this, because waking up Hitler from his nap was considered a very bad idea. But nonetheless, he was waken up and was given the report of an invasion force landing at Normandy. He literally laughed it off and asked when the real invasion was going to be, because he was waiting for it at Calais, and so was Rommel. He had everything stacked up nearly everything stacked up at Calais. Had the Allies made the landing at Calais, I don't believe they would have been successful at all. Now, the part of the problem that happened in this landing, and particularly at Normandy, was for the Nazis. There was a big debate between the upper generals on where the tanks should be placed. Should they be placed right on the coastline to throw any invasion force back into the sea, or they should be placed further inland? Unfortunately for them, the proponents of the latter policy prevailed. Rommel, of course, being the one that thought that any tank should have been placed immediately along the coastline, including at Normandy, to throw any invasion force back into the sea. Had Hitler listened to Rommel, I believe this is what would have happened. But instead, generals like Jodl and basically his other butt kissers that he had around him advocated putting their tanks further inland. Well, the reason why this didn't succeed was because once it got to Normandy, and again, Hitler didn't believe that this was the real invasion, their best Panzer tanks were further inland. The beachhead was established early on, and taking on those tanks, they already had a beachhead inland, and so while taking on these tanks was rather gruesome and bloody, they eventually were able to succeed. If not for that beachhead that they already had on land to get supplies and such shipped from across the other side of the channel, they had a constant supply coming in from Great Britain that was shipped across the channel constantly during this battle. They were fed and supplied quite excellently. And in this eventual war of attrition, the Allies did eventually win. Put those tanks on the shoreline, different result. They get thrown back into the sea because there's not a continuous supply of ammunition, food, and weapons. And tanks, no less. Even as the Allied and the British invaders lost supplies, more were readily supplyable immediately to the coast, which they already had control of. And so this is the story of the greatest wartime deception of all time, where Nazi Germany completely was fooled by double agent spies into believing the Normandy landing was going to happen in a totally different location, and they set the best of their defenses up at the wrong spot. So this has been a Saturday night version. Appreciate you guys. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more. Let me know what types of things that you want to hear here. I obviously have a very tiny audience, But if you want to hear more about the war stuff, great. If you want to hear more about the relationship stuff, that's great too. I just want to build, make people happy, talking about things I enjoy talking about. So anyhow, enjoy your Saturday night. We'll see you tomorrow, and peace out, homies.